からね。あ、わかった。
Hello everyone and welcome to Otaku Go here on the Gunpla network. As always, I'm the Spicer, and today, as you can tell, we're reviewing the SEGA Nekomonogatari, Black Hanekawa. Also, Neko Hanekawa if you want to, or just the cat girl from Bakemonogatari, or the cat girl from Monogatari, because there's a lot of stuff here. And I'm going to be real honest, I knew of the Monogatari series, but I hadn't watched it up until this point, and these are actually Danik's. He got them from Nanoma and sent them to me for review, and then I'm going to send them on to him. And this kind of sparked me into just saying, you know what, finally, let's do this. And as you can tell, I borrowed a few visual cues, but overall for a price figure, this is pretty solid and a good representation of what we see in the anime. Now, there are a few things I'm going to point out, and as far as quality control goes, there's a few things you're going to notice that stand out in not so good ways. But as I said, this is a prize figure. It's not going to be running you a ton of money. It's just something to be aware of if you're weighing your purchases on figurines like this. Now, before we get to the nitty-gritty kind of issues and the benefits of something like this, overall, very pleased. It looks really cool. I think this is a figure that, after I've watched more of the Monogatari series, I might pick up. I don't know. I don't know that it's my favorite version of Neko Hanekawa, or Tsubasa Hanekawa if you would rather, but I think it is really cool. The hair is definitely probably the biggest selling piece for this particular one, that of course being other than the also important. Now, of course, in terms of the box, it is pretty standard fare for the SEGA stuff I've looked at. It is a little older, so you kind of have to take that into consideration, but it still has that vibe of Monogatari, and a few production images. Actually, really just this one product image. You don't see anything else on the box, which is kind of cool. With Monogatari, Bakemonogatari, all that stuff has a very unique vibe and visual style to it, and they try to bring a little bit of that to the box, which is nice. So if you do want to display the box, it's still just a box in my opinion, but it does help add a little bit extra versus just having the figurine plastered all over the box with some kind of vaguely aesthetic looking designs. But overall, I mean, I'm pretty pleased as far as I can be pleased with a box. It definitely has the whole vibe. It has a very consistent color scheme. Not really sure why the green. For my remembering, I don't really think there's a lot of green to do with Black Hanekawa, but I could be wrong. I always thought it was more yellows and blacks and reds, but I could be wrong. But overall, it's a box. Nothing really special to write home about, but if you do want to pop it up on your shelf, it's at least slightly more visually interesting than just some blank cardboard or some product images. Now, once you get the figurine out of the box, what are you going to get? Well, we've seen a little bit of it so far, but if we kind of take a little head-down look here, just general ideas. The face sculpt is nice. It has kind of that weird long neck, bent back pose that Monogatari is fairly popular for. It has a nice overall pose as well that is fitting for the character. Not quite JoJo style posing, but kind of reminiscent of it, if you will. Maybe it's a JoJo reference, I don't know. But overall, pretty nice. If you go down the front of the figure though, where the figurine isn't looking, so I don't know if people will really pose it this way, you do get a better look at how the head connects to the neck, the kind of plasticky looking skin, the stomach, which also kind of sells that, but you get a lot of the flowing of the clothes, which is kind of cool. They add a lot of really intricate sculpt work here, which is nice for a figurine that's just in pajamas. The hair, of course, being a big seller, is actually a lot less sculpted, but is still quite nice and probably the biggest single individual piece on this figurine. It does have that little seam line where it connects to the back of the head, but overall, the back piece of the hair is probably not only almost as big as the whole figure itself, but probably just as heavy. That's where a lot of the heft of this figurine comes in. It's nice looking, not a lot of shading. It would have been kind of nice to maybe see some shading or some other kind of coloration there, but in the animation it is pure white, so just kind of something you have to deal with there. When you zoom back out, overall everything's really good. You don't notice a lot of the maybe smaller issues with either some seams connecting in maybe some very obvious places, or weird paint mishaps, or even kind of the plasticky skin. But a couple of things you will notice from a zoomed out view are the hands. At least the hand that's kind of stretched back, being the right hand, is very exaggerated, very long, which isn't necessarily all that unusual. It just looks different proportionally than the rest of the figurine. Now, outside of that, going back to this plasticky skin situation, because it is very noticeable, and it kind of draws more attention to some of the places where the figure connects, i.e. the stomach mostly. The stomach connects very well in terms of how it goes into the pants and the upper part of the pajama set, but that's probably the most obvious point of this very plasticky, very glossy looking skin situation. The top isn't too bad from like an actual just seeing it in person type setup. The lights and the camera add a little bit more of that kind of glare, but it is much more noticeable just to see the textural difference there, the finish difference, if you will. And it just seems a little too much to me, but that's my personal preference. Now, outside of that, when you go back and look at the upper portion, the opai, the collarbone, the neck, they're once again a little glossy, but most people aren't going to have lights aiming down on most of their figurines, even if it's in a Detolf style cabinet with lights above it. I don't think it'll probably be that glary, but it is still that kind of same texture, which doesn't follow up into the head, which is a little strange. So it does make it a little more obvious, but not too bad. The connection points here, once again, not too bad, but that glare can draw your attention to it and make it slightly more obvious. But something that really didn't stand out to me until I really blasted this thing with light. You do have a seam line in the arm, but it looks like the seam of the pajamas, so that's really not all that big a deal either. Now, in terms of the hands, like I said, they're a little soft, but they're really not that bad. Fairly small portions of the figurine, so they're not going to draw a lot of your attention, but if you do go over this with a magnifying glass or just really look in detail, you are going to see some of these oddities. Not terrible, especially for a price figure. At the price, you're really not expecting really crazy specific detail like this, but it is something to kind of consider. Outside of that, though, the feet, pretty standard, match up. The legs, most of the flowing on the leg parts of the pants looks really good. Some shading there, which is nice. You do have maybe some smudges here on some of the little cat heads across the body. You see some on the top as well. But they're there, they're nice enough, and with it being a figurine like this, for a character like this, it is pretty easy suspension of disbelief to say, oh, that just got messed up when she transformed or did something or whatever. Just something I think is fairly easy to rationalize, but some people out there may not think so. Now, one of the, pretty much the only kind of like little factory defect type situation is some paint is peeled up on the right sleeve. Not too bad. I believe Danny could probably fix this if he decides to. But it is something that you have to think about with these figurines at this price, as some of them may arrive with some kind of scuffs, marks, smudges, anything like that is possible. And really, this price point, I think a lot of people have this expectation of like, okay, if it happens, it happens. It's not a huge deal. I didn't drop like $50, $60, $70, $100, $200 on this. You know, 20, 30 bucks, whatever. It's not great, but it's not the end of the world either. So kind of just in overall, you know, a lot of the detail on this kit is nice. Not this kit, this figurine. The plasticky skin texture is something that bothered me, but it's not really that bothersome, and it's still not something I think that would be a deal breaker for me on a figurine like this. Everything is sculpted and detailed nice. The face a little bit soft in the nose area, but not terrible, and kind of once again can match up with some of the animation cells. It's got some of the wonkier animations in it, so it's something that you can kind of be like, okay, yeah, whatever, that's fine. But overall, I mean, for a price figure, it's quite nice. If you're a fan of Neko Hanekawa, Black Hanekawa, Tsubasa Hanekawa, or just Monogatari in general, and you want another figurine, this is not a bad option. Now, of course, this character has a variety of different looks, and we'll be taking a look at another one a little later on, but in a separate video, of course. But this is a good option if you like the long hair Neko version, as the hair is kind of the centerpiece of this figure. Of course, if you have any questions, do pop them in the comments down below, and Danik and I will do our best to answer them. If you like other figurines or Gunpla, be sure to check out our other content. And if there are any figurines you might want us to take a look at in the future, we're always open to suggestions. But as always, friends, please stay safe and keep on collecting.